The not-so-promising promise. Why Moses couldn't enter the Promised Land. The man handpicked by God, the man who led the Israelites out of Egypt, the man who parted the Red Sea, the man who spoke to God in the burning bush, the man who led his people to the brink of the Promised Land, wasn't allowed to enter it himself. But why? Imagine, if you will, the vast expanse of the ancient desert, the sand dunes stretching as far as the eye can see. The sun beats down relentlessly, the heat waves shimmering on the horizon. This is the setting for our tale, the backdrop to the story of one man's epic journey and the ultimate denial of his final destination. The man, the myth, the Moses. Moses, the man who led the Israelites out of Egypt, the man who parted the Red Sea, the man who spoke to God in the burning bush, a man of many miracles. He was the chosen one, the deliverer of his people. He was the hero of the Old Testament, the man who had a direct line to the Almighty. The Promised Land. The Promised Land, a land flowing with milk and honey, a land of freedom and prosperity. It was the goal of the Israelites, the reward for their suffering and perseverance. It was the land promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It was the land that Moses was leading his people towards. The water crisis. But then, a crisis. The Israelites, wandering in the desert, found themselves without water. They were thirsty, they were desperate, and they turned to Moses for help. And Moses, being the man of action that he was, decided to take matters into his own hands. The rock incident. God told Moses to speak to a rock, and it would bring forth water. But Moses, in his frustration, struck the rock twice with his staff. Water did indeed gush forth, but at what cost? God was not pleased. Because you did not trust in me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land I give them, he declared. Numbers 20, verse 12. The fallout. And so Moses, the man who had led his people through the desert, the man who had performed countless miracles, was denied entry into the Promised Land. The reason? A simple act of disobedience, a failure to trust in God's power. The symbolism. But there's more to this story than meets the eye. The rock, as it turns out, was a symbol of Christ. Just as the Israelites drank from the spiritual rock that accompanied them, so too do believers drink from the living water that Christ provides. 1 Corinthians 10, verse 4. In striking the rock, Moses was symbolically striking Christ. It was a prophetic act, a foreshadowing of the crucifixion. The lesson. So what can we learn from this story? It's a tale of trust, of faith, of obedience. It's a reminder that even the greatest of men are not immune to the consequences of disobedience. And it's a lesson in the power of symbols, in the way that seemingly simple acts can carry profound meaning. Conclusion. And so, Moses, the man who led his people to the Promised Land, was denied entry. He could see it from a distance, but he could not set foot in it. He had led his people to the threshold of their goal, but he could not cross it himself. It's a story of triumph and tragedy, of success and failure, of faith and disobedience. It's a story that reminds us that even the greatest of heroes have their flaws, and that even the most promising of promises can be denied. The end. What would you have done if you were Moses and found out that God wouldn't allow you to enter the Promised Land? Would you have been angry or sad? How do you think that made Moses feel, after all he and the Israelites had been through together? From the incredible divine deliverance from Egypt, to the exhausting wandering for 40 years in the wilderness, I don't know about you, but I think I would have been pretty upset about it myself. All that hard work to get to the promised land, then get right up to the border, only to be turned away by God Himself? It wouldn't have seemed right. But then, maybe God knows best. What lessons do you think God is teaching you after you listened to this tale? Let us know in the comments below, and be sure to like and subscribe.